Hey, let's talk about some skip loading. Shoving your face full of cheeseburgers and pancakes and French toast and spam and alcohol and I don't know, anything. At least that's what I'm hearing lately. So that's the reason that I wanted to make sure that I get this information out. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there right now.
Loading skip. Loading skip.
I have had the skip load method for over 20 years. I mean, it's all I ever talked about when I was first developing it and kind of having it evolve. So I got to the point where I just felt like people just didn't want to hear it from me anymore. They'd see me coming and they'd be like, oh, he's going to talk about skip loading again. And then I kind of just, I guess, lost track of time and assumed that everybody knew. Then along comes the next generation and they're like, Skip? Who's Skip? What's skip loading? I don't know what that. Oh, I know what that is. I heard from a reality TV star that it's eating a bunch of garbage on the weekend and then doing your regular diet during the week, and you're supposed to get lean. But I tried it and it didn't work. I didn't work with Skip, and I'm admitting that I didn't do it right, but it didn't work. Things like that. So, and I'm laughing now because I think it's funny. I just didn't think it was funny when I was hearing those things, if I'm being honest with you. You work hard. You work hard. You spend a lot of time developing, a system and a method, and you're known for it. I mean, I'm Skip. It's called skip loading. Branding is everything, right? I've got my name on it. I don't want it to be misunderstood. If you don't like that dieting method and you don't prefer it, maybe you're an old school type guy. Maybe you're an old head. You just want to be tortured when you diet. You want to feel like, oh, I'm dieting, I'm disciplined. There's nothing wrong with that. I got an old head side to me too. I just found a method that I thought was missing at the time. And at that time, I was always thinking outside of the box. I'd like to take methods and things that were being done in the industry at that time and kind of trial and error and be able to say, okay, that worked. Or why do we even do this? Because this is stupid. So I did that with a lot of things then. And I was fortunate enough to be taken under the wing of a guy named Zilla on the message boards. And he kind of introduced me to what eventually became skip loading. Now, I want to dig into the history a little bit of skip loading because I think it matters. And I know some people will be like, just give me the information, Skip, so I can run back to my clients and I can charge them a lot of money because I know how to skip load them and they're going to love it because, I'm going to tell them to eat burgers and pizza and everything else. And then I'm going to pretend that I'm the super genius, like Wile E. Coyote. I don't know. I dated myself apparently with that reference. When he's in the little wooden shed and he's cutting off the tops of the carrots and he's putting nitroglycerin in them. And unbeknownst to him, Bugs is pulling the wooden shack with a farm tractor out onto the train tracks. And he's laughing to himself nefariously about how much of a super genius he is. And then, of course, he gets hit by the train. It's a very predictable thing. That's what cartoons were when I was young, but I digress. Anyway, I'm spoon feeding, essentially. It's different now. Back in the day, it was spoon feeding people or giving people information that they could benefit from to get leaner and that sort of thing and be better competitors and stuff. Because this is all bodybuilding related. Doesn't mean that you have to be a bodybuilder to benefit from skip loading. It's just that's where it originated from. We're extreme in this industry. So we want to get leaner. We want to get absolutely inside out, shredded, look like we have no skin, that sort of thing. And I came up with a different method or was able to put together a method that at that time was not being done. So, I want to get into the history a little bit, but I want to point this out because I think this is important. Understand this, whether you like skip loading or not, whether you prefer to use it, whether you prefer not to use it. It is a proven method of dieting. There's no way around it. You could say it didn't work for you. You didn't like it, whatever. You didn't work with me, for starters, because if you worked with me, you wouldn't say that. If you truly understood how to skip load, it would have worked. because it works for 99.9% of people. And I still say that 0.1% just doesn't execute the way they're supposed to, or they can't shut the food down when they need to and they eat too much for their skip loads, or the regular diet is too high in calories. There's a bunch of variables there. But don't blame the method, blame the execution. Because I'm going to put my money on the fact that you didn't understand it. You don't understand them. And that's why I'm talking about it today, because there's so much misinformation. So who has used it? Let's see. Every amateur and professional division that there is. Every single one of them, including the 212. Had a guy in the 212 he's chasing like points to hit the Olympia stage. Worked for him great too. NFL players. I had an NFL client for 6 years. Jimmy Kennedy came to town in the off season. Worked for him great. It works for people who don't bodybuild. There are different variables that I won't get into, with that. I'm changing variables because that's not important to the demographic that I'm talking to right now. But the method itself works. Here's the other part that's important to remember too. Every single well-respected, and some who aren't very well-respected, if I'm being honest, they jump on the bandwagon too, prep guy in the industry uses some method, some form of skip loading. They don't call it skip loading, but there are parallels there. There was no such thing as a refeed meal prior to skip loading in 2001, 2002. There was none of it. It was an antiquated, archaic way of dieting, in my opinion. Did it work? It worked. Did it work equally as well as skip loading? I would argue that it didn't. Or refeeding, very, very high carb days. Cheat meals, arguably. Cheat meals were there before skip loading. There's no question. Here's the thing with cheat meals. Cheat meals weren't strategically placed to benefit the metabolism. Cheat meals were, I've dieted so long that I just lost my shit, and I don't care about anything else in this world. My children, my husband, wife, both, girlfriend, whatever, anyone, myself. All I want to do right now is eat. I don't care about the show. I don't care about nothing. And if you are on the other end and you're like, well, that's a lack of discipline or what, you know what? Full transparency is anybody and everybody. I think a lot of the average people who either don't compete or compete at a lower level don't understand that, sorry to say, but even the pros deal with that. They may not cheat very often, but you know what? There are a lot of pros, a lot of high-ranking amateurs who really struggle to not fall off the wagon at least once or twice during a prep. And I'm not going to get into names because I'm not a name dropper. There was at least one Mr. Olympia who admitted to me that he drove through McDonald's several times, maybe not several, a few times a week, while he was getting ready for his biggest amateur show to turn pro because he could not deal with the diet. And yes, he won the show because he was genetically superior to everybody on that stage. And it wasn't even close. It was unanimous. May have gone on to win several Olympias. I don't know. You didn't hear that from me. The point is it's normal where a lot of people who aren't connected don't know that, because pros aren't going to come out and tell you, especially high level people. They're known to be disciplined. They're not going to tell you, oh yeah, I can't stay on my diet. Okay. So all of that happens. That's the normalcy that I'm wanting to convey. So this works. It just literally works for everyone. You know who it doesn't work for? People who literally can't shut it down, who once they get a little bit of food that is different than their regular diet, it's like the floodgates open and they do lose that discipline and they can't get back on, or they don't get back on soon enough. Instead of having one skip load meal, they may have several. So that, of course, is going to derail you pretty quickly as well. Here's the history behind it. And I'm going to try to keep this as short as I can, but I still think it's beneficial to know before I get into the actual method. And that is this. Zilla took me under his wing years ago, 2002, 2001, in there somewhere. And it was a peaking method. Peaking method means you're getting ready to get on stage. So either the morning of the show or the day, or maybe 2 days before, you do something, you alter your diet so that you can fill out, so that your muscles are full of glycogen. A full muscle presses against the skin and makes very, very thin, lean skin look even leaner. The main difference between being fat and flat is only the letter L. You can be really lean, but if you're flat, your muscles are not full, you will look soft. And soft in bodybuilding might as well be fat. So it's vitally important that the muscles are full of glycogen, especially when you get older, because you got loose skin. Older competitors know this more than anybody. Masters competitors know they have to be tight. The younger guys still have nice collagen in their skin. They can be a little bit flat and they're not gonna look too bad. But it's vitally important. This method started as a peaking method. How it evolved to a dieting method was because I was 6 to 8 weeks out from a show back in 2002. And at full transparency, and I could not stay on my diet. I was so depleted and driving myself into the ground that it was one weekend, I'm like, I just don't care. I don't care about anything. I have to eat. Went and ate a bunch of Krispy Kremes, threw them down and everything. Next day, I was like, oh, I look great. Because you always do after you eat a bunch of carbs and you fill out, you're not flat, you look great. And then, of course, you hold water from there. And if you ate too much and you ate too many calories, then you could add some body fat. So I thought, what did I do? That sort of thing. Get through the next week after I got back on my diet, and I was like, oh, I'm 2 pounds later. I look great. I look better than I did last week. Now, I'm a pretty logical guy. I'm not the brightest star in the sky, but I am logical and I am sensible. So I thought, well, we're going to do this again. That was at the time where I was thinking outside of the box more than ever. I wanted to prove that things work, and I tried to be smart. It's trial and error. It's everything that all of us do. I did it on more of a grand scale because I was helping a lot of people, and a lot of people were looking to me for my opinions and things like that because they knew that I was kind of an outside of the box type of guy. And it worked again. So again, I'm not stupid. This is working. It is not normal. It is not anything that I could really talk to anybody about outside of Zilla. I went back to Zilla and I'm like, look, this is what's going on. And he just laughed. I said, he goes, you're going to do it again? I'm like, of course I'm going to do it again. I'm going to do it until it doesn't work. And it worked for the last 6 weeks. I showed up. I won the show as a light heavy. I lost the overall because I can't seem to win overall. So I ate my ass to a super, I think, at that time, which is usually the case. Yet to win it overall. Anyway, I came away from that show, with great conditioning at that time. And people were reaching out to me saying, not only are you in great condition, how'd you get in that great condition? I was like, I ate Krispy Kremes. Like, what the hell? I don't know. I can't really explain it, but this is what happened. And people just started coming in droves. So that was essentially how I got noticed, or the main reason that I got noticed in the industry at that time. And it kind of turned into a little side hustle because no one was making, much of any living at that time doing that sort of thing. As far as prep and online training, it's just the message board days. And it just kind of built into this thing that, 10, 15, 20 years later, it's been 24 now, put three of the 4 kids through college and making a very good income for a very long time. So my point here is the method is established. It's not like it's something new. You may have not heard about it before, but that doesn't mean it's new. It's been around arguably longer than some of the people who question it, which is kind of funny to me. It used to bother me when people would question it. And I was always, trying to explain, and some people would laugh. They're like, that's just crazy. They're not doing that. Okay, that's cool. And that's where I am these days. You don't want to do it, don't do it. If it's not your preference to diet, don't diet that way. There are a million ways to get to the top of the mountain. I have a good way, and I have a way that's unique and it's different. But here's the catch. It has evolved considerably. Skiploading has evolved over the last 20, 24 years. And that's what I want to point out more than anything. It is not go keto during the week and eat a bunch of garbage on the weekend. And I'm not trying to single out my buddy, by making that comment. But that's the most recent comment that I had heard. Now, I have heard many different takes on skiploading that are equally as uninformed. They're just not accurate. That's why I want to get this information out here. It did occur to me when I thought, everybody knows about skiploading. We have a next generation. Some of them don't know about skip as much as I think everybody knows who I am. Now, the old heads know who I am. because I've been around a long time. But I need to get this information out there so that it's accurate so people can understand. And if they don't want to use it, they don't need to use it. Here's what I don't want. I don't want anybody to say that it doesn't work, because that's unfair. I have proved that it works. People who have not worked with me directly have proved that it works, even though there are some people who haven't worked with me and done it and screwed it up. Reality TV star, as an example, admits that he didn't do it correctly, goes on his podcast, couple million people, and says, oh yeah, well, back in the day, I did this skip loading thing. What a joke. You eat a bunch of garbage and it didn't work. I didn't do it right, but it still didn't work. You just told 1.5 million listeners that it doesn't work when you just admitted that you didn't do it right anyway. You certainly didn't work with me. That person is also not in the bodybuilding industry, so he must have stumbled upon it somewhere, did his own version of it, it didn't work, and years later he just has a podcast and he decides to tell 500,000 or 1.5 million people that it doesn't work. I don't appreciate, that's not fair. Quite frankly, it's not terribly respectful, but it is what it is. Those are the times we live in these days, apparently. I don't know. So I want this information to be accurate. The evolution is important, because even though those Krispy Kremes or whatever work, I was smart enough to know that there has to be a more optimal way to do this from a health standpoint. And it's probably not going to be great to, throw down this type of garbage. Here's the thing with the garbage type of food. It's not bad to have one meal a week out of, say, 6 meals a day times 7 in a week, that's 42 meals. And one of them is Krispy Kreme. When you're already getting lean and you're in a deficit and everything else. I mean, I'm not going to consider that terribly unhealthy. What I do want to look at it and wanted to look at the time was, okay, over time, if this is something that's going to be done for a long time, could it potentially have negative, health ramifications? And this is even more important, is what is that initial stress response, or arguably inflammatory response, of throwing all of those? What's it doing? It makes sense that it would be inflammatory. It makes sense that it's going to be a shock to the system. It makes sense that when you're in such an insulin sensitive state, when you're getting lean and you're in a deficit, that it's going to have, this shock effect on your system. And that's only at one meal a day. There are people who will skip load. I mean, there are times where I have skip loaded day and a half because of being so depleted. So there's a lot of different ways to do it. It's very nuanced. It's very individual. And that's why it's not difficult to be successful with the method on your own without working with me, but it's difficult or more difficult to optimize it, because I have the experience of doing this not only with myself for over 20 years, but with, I was going to say hundreds it's thousands of people. So there's nobody with no more experience doing this than me. I do have trainers who I have mentored that, around the world, one in South Africa, one in Doha, things like, they're scattered essentially in demographics that I don't reach. And they're there for a reason. They're there to be able to train clients in that area, not only with training and nutrition, but also with skip loading as well. And they're very good at it too. They understand the methods backward and forwards. So, I would say it's a limited, maybe a handful of people that really know how it works with a broad demographic, of people inside bodybuilding and outside of bodybuilding. So I want to break down a little bit and explain what the actual method is. And this is the best way to explain it. It's burning body fat in a cut phase is analogous to starting a little campfire on a beach. And you have to burn that fire for 16, 18, 20 weeks. We'll call the wood body fat. You have a pile of that you have to get through. You have to burn in that 16, 18, 20 weeks. And of course, you want to do that as optimally as possible. So I would say this. Let's say it's not burning very well. You throw a couple logs on there. It takes a while to burn, but it burns. Then one week you might burn, 3 logs. The next week you only burn 1. And then the week after that, you only burn 1. You get a little nervous because you got to burn through this wood. Body fat, same thing. Wood equals body fat. Body fat equals wood. So the thought was, What if I, instead of walking by the fire and putting another log on the fire, what if I throw gasoline in? Got a big old fire. Oh, this is great. That sort of thing. I'm going to burn more wood. The fire is going to be burning hotter. Metabolism, fire, burning more wood. You with me? You with me? You see where I'm going? I'm making that analogy because I'm pretty simple-minded. I know I would get it if I were on the other end, so I'm hoping that it makes a little bit more sense. That gas being thrown on the fire is added calories once a week. So it's kind of like you're burning this fire for 7 days, and then on the 7th day, you come and you throw gasoline on it. It burns more. You're able to throw more wood on the fire, and you're ripping through this pile of wood, arguably faster than you would, WOULD, if you didn't throw gas on the fire, okay? So I think that the gas, I say calories, the gas being thrown on the fire is calories, but even more importantly, it's carbs. Carbs just have more of a metabolic response. It's twofold. They have more of a metabolic response and impact on the thyroid. That's number one. Number two is this. They also have a side benefit that fat or protein doesn't have, and that is it will directly help to fill out glycogen stores as you're remaining in a deficit and your muscles are kind of shrinking a little bit because they're losing fullness due to losing glycogen. Here's the thing, though. You're always going to be a little bit depleted of glycogen to be able to maximize burning body fat efficiently. That has to happen. You can't remain full all the time during a cut phase and expect that you're going to burn body fat at an efficient rate. It's not going to happen. You have to deal with some level of depletion. Arguably, the more depleted you are, the more body fat can become that main fuel source. But we also need to maintain workouts. We're not just gen pop here. We not only need to get lean, but we need to maintain the muscle that we have during the cut phase. So we also need to have good workouts. We need to have the energy for those workouts, which is glycogen. Okay. Weight resistance, weight training is reliant on the main fuel source of glycogen. So if you want to have good and productive workouts, you got to have enough glycogen. You got to have enough carbs. Adding those carbs in these meals, the skip load meals, is more beneficial than adding a ton of fat. Now, I will say this because this has been missed, and I consider it kind of rudimentary, but I've been doing this a long time. A lot of people don't understand that a depleted muscle will also suck up, like a sponge, triglyceride. So it's not that the fat that you're taking in a skip load meal is necessarily bad. It'll be used. It just won't be the preferred. It's not nowhere near as much. The body will store far more glycogen than it will triglyceride in the muscle, but it will still store triglycerides. So the fat is not going to get in the way. The fat is certainly not going to make you fat unless you're just consuming far more fat in those meals than you actually need. Okay. So remember, you're in a deficit. So one of the things that I tell people all the time is you do have to favor carbohydrates and have those skip load meals be predominantly, they need to be carb heavy, predominantly carbs. And people will say, well, how much fat? How much fat? Everybody needs black and white measures. There aren't any. Okay. It's not like if you have 10 grams or 15 grams of fat in that meal, that's good. And as soon as you cross 22, and sometimes I just want to give an arbitrary number and just pretend it's an actual real number that means something, because people want that black and white answer so badly that if you just give it to them, they really won't even question it. They'll just like, okay, I'm not going to go over. Oh, I'm at 22. I got to back off a little to 20. But I don't want to do that. I don't want to give the wrong idea because there would be no truth to that. The fat needs to be low, relatively low to moderate. You can't sit down. Here's a bad example of a skip load meal. If you just sit down to wings and maybe even French fries, that's predominantly just a fat meal. There's not going to be enough carbohydrate in there to make that skip load meal as optimal as I would want it if you're working with me. Now, here's the catch. Here's the caveat. From a metabolic standpoint, the bolus of calories is still going to positively impact your metabolism. You're still throwing gas on the fire, but you don't get the side benefit or the added benefit of it being more optimal by being carb heavy. So it needs to be carb heavy. So the question becomes, how much do I eat during a skip load meal? There are no black and white answers for that because I don't give parameters around macros. I want the meals to be carb dominant. I want the fat to still be in there, low to moderate, and these will have to be played with a little bit. There are no strict parameters. We are throwing gas on the fire. We want the gas to be predominantly carbohydrate with some fat in there as well. You need to gauge how much to eat based on your hunger level. I would recommend not going into a skip load meal with a shovel and just eating the food as fast as you can. It's not a challenge. It's not how much food can I get in. It's not about bragging rights. Oh, I had this and I ate that and it was crazy and I was miserable. You don't eat to the point of being miserable. You eat to the point of being satiated and full. Okay. It should be okay, yeah, I'm full. I don't need any more. If I eat any more food, I'm probably going to be kind of taking deep breath, that sort of thing. Yeah, you want to get full. You just don't want to be miserable. You don't want to feel wiped out for the next 3 hours. And this can carry over from meal to meal if you have more than one skip load meal too. So sometimes there is this awakening, if you will, or this revelation when the skip load meals go from 1 to 2, because you have to balance those meals out a little bit. Most people, when they first start, the first couple weeks, it takes a few weeks to find a rhythm with the skip load. You have to be able to give yourself that time. I give the client that time to kind of feel things out because typically they do go overboard on the first one. You can't look at the weight on the scale and go, oh, I gained, 6 pounds or I gained 7 pounds. It's too nuanced to be able to say, oh, I gained this amount of weight the next day or the next couple days, and it was too much. You can't do that. You need to let the following week play out because a lot of times that initial weight, again, is just water weight. So a lot of times that gas is going to have that metabolism rolling real, real hot. You could end up 2-3 pounds less by the end of the week and go, oh my goodness, it's happened many, many times. So I always tell the client, because sometimes, again, I talked earlier about patterns. Patterns are huge, fluctuations in weight. We want to see those patterns so they become a little bit more predictable. What I'll do is I will get clients Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and they're already predicting, oh yeah, I'm not going to be down by the weekend. I'm probably not going to baseline because, this is my weight. That's not how it needs to be looked at. The weight, again, is secondary. I've spoken about this a lot. It's just another tool to gauge progress so that we can find patterns with these fluctuations. Eat till you're satisfied. Eat till you're full. When you go to that second meal, if you're still not hungry and you're like, oh, I could barely eat anything for the second meal, the next time that you skip load with 2 meals, it could be the following week. It could be that we pull back to 1 meal the next week and we don't go back to 2 meals for a couple weeks. It depends on that. But when you go back to those 2 meals, you already know, I got to balance this out a little bit. I have to get a little less full from the first meal so that I can still hit that second meal with the same attention as I did the first meal. Now, I will put parameters around macros as far as carbohydrate and a little bit around fat intake if insulin is being involved. That's a blood sugar level issue, especially when there's more than 1 meal for the skip load, because I don't want that second skip load meal to be eaten if your blood glucose levels are 100, 110. We want those blood sugar levels to come down ideally into the 70s, mid 70s. That's great. If you're low 80s, I'm not going to worry about that too much. If you start to bottom out and you're in the 60s, then we know we can have that second meal a little bit sooner. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be using insulin to use the blood glucose parameters either. They can be used when you're not using insulin. That's fine. But that's a little bit more in depth and a little bit more advanced in the skip loading process than that client that's working with you for the first time and you're just starting out skip loading and you're only 5, 6, 7 weeks into skip loading. The blood sugar levels I'm not going to focus on as much until we get deeper and the skip loading becomes more nuanced. The other question that comes into play is with insulin. People still to this day, and I just wish, this is why I got out of the box 20 years ago and started questioning a lot of these things, because in the industry, we latch on to these that we don't even question. As an example, if you're using insulin, you have high levels of insulin, and you're ingesting fat, dietary fat, then you're going to store that fat as body fat. That's laughable. That's just not how it works until that amount of fat is just so excessive that you don't have a use for it. That is possible, but it doesn't happen in the, oh, I'm at 20 grams. It doesn't probably happen, if I had to guess it, 30 or 40 grams. It depends a lot on depletion, and it depends on the amount of carbs that you have in there. So if you have 40 or 50 grams of fat and you only have 50 grams of carbs, yeah, okay, that's not going to be a very good ratio. If I have 20 or 30 grams of fat in it, I want 200, 250 grams of carbs. Is it a rule? No. But that's what my experience says is more optimal than the other ratio. And here's an example. I'll get into restaurants here in a minute, but go to the Cheesecake Factory. It's arguably some of the best French toast I've ever had. And for a chain, I'm not a big chain guy. I'm not a big Cheesecake Factory guy, but I had their French toast one time, and I was just blown away by how decadent it was. So I looked it up online for the nutrition fact, and I don't think it's right, because I've been in this nutrition game for a long time, but it doesn't matter. These were the numbers. It literally had 185 grams of fat, and it only had, like, I don't know, 100, and I'd have to check it, but 140 grams of carbs. It was just so absurd. I was thinking to myself, how could you even get that much fat in there? Even if you went full cream, egg yolks, full butter, like, I don't know, are you injecting it? Even if you put Crisco in it, I don't know how you got to that. The point is, though, even if those numbers are not accurate, it's the reminder is that these type of restaurant foods are incredibly heavy, and I'll heavy in fat. And I'll get to that in a minute with restaurants versus making your food at home, because it's a no-brainer. So the point is with these skip load meals is they need to be carbohydrate dominant. They just need to be. Here's where you get into playing with the fat just a little bit. And that is, if you're going to monitor your blood sugar levels, and they do tend to run high, and I do recommend that. At first, never did that. It was just about, oh, you're insulin sensitive, and it worked. I didn't really have to look into it too much. It was just working. And people were coming to me in droves, and it just didn't. I'd get the question every now and then, but I'm like, I don't see why it's that, because I wasn't running into a lot of people that it wasn't being all that effective for. It just plain worked. But if your blood sugar levels start to run high, like they did for me for a prep in about 2008, 9, 10, somewhere in there, can't remember. The older I get, it feels like 3 years ago, but it wasn't. My blood sugar level started to run high after the first meal. So I thought, you know what? I can use insulin, or I can try to manipulate my fat intake or my fiber intake to try to minimize that surge of blood sugar. And by increasing the fat, I was able to do that. So that's a more nuanced approach, but I put that in there because that is another reason to manipulate the fat intake in some of these meals if your BG levels are running higher or consistently higher. The other question that I get a lot is, what about the protein intake during skip load meals? When I first started, didn't care about it. I was like, you know what? Doesn't matter if you have protein in there, because it's a bolus amount of calories. And we all know that if you're taking in an excess amount of calories, at that particular time, the protein really doesn't matter as much, because the excess calories are kind of protein sparing in that sense. Plus, it's one meal. Or if you're building into a bigger skip load, it's 2, 3, 4 meals. It's literally for one day, and you're already in a surplus at that point. So, yeah, it's really not that important. I did change that over time to put the protein in there, or to at least use foods that will give you some complete protein as well, just so that it's not missed. No real reason for it, if I'm being completely honest, other than to kind of get back to I'll tell you what it does. It helps people to pick more nutritious meals based on, I tell you this, you give clients room, you just give them this much room, they're gonna find that loophole. So I mean, I'd have people going 4 bags of gummy worms, and I'm like, how can you even stomach that? That's like insane. Does it work? Yeah, it actually does work. It will work. It's just not terribly nutritious. And I don't know, I'd probably get an ulcer or have horribly bad heartburn. I now push for these skip load meals to provide as much nutrition as possible. Probably because I'm older. I don't want to die tomorrow. I want to be as healthy as I can. And when I was young, we're talking about skip loading 20, 24 years ago. I was 30 years old. When you're 30 years old, you don't think about things like that. I was pretty much invincible at that time and was not terribly concerned with my health. So did I think it was unhealthy? No, I really didn't. I just knew that it was effective. And if I'm being honest and I'm being fair, I'm not in the health business. I'm in the get huge, get ripped business. People don't come to me and go, man, I just really want to be healthy, Skip. I need you to help me be healthy. They don't do that. They come to me and say, I want to look like I don't have any skin. I want to look huge. I want to look like an anatomy chart. And I'm over here going, I have a way. It has never really been about the health component. As it got later and as I got older, evolution, methods. Look, if I left the method alone, it probably, it would have been effective, but evolving over 20 years, common sense will tell you it's got to be a pretty solid method if you've had 20 years to optimize it and tweak it and play with it and adjust it. So it is incredibly effective, which is disappointing because I would want it to be even more popular now than it was 20 years ago. It needs to get a little bit more out of the bodybuilding realm and more into the people who want to weight train and be in great shape, but they're older. And that's where I'm getting now with my client base, because my demographic does seem to be older because I'm older. I'm relatable. I can train more on injuries and injury prevention, longevity, and you can skip load and still be healthy. So that is part of the evolution of the skip load. At one point, was it throw in a bunch of garbage? It was. But this is what I struggle with. And you may think, well, then Skip, how can you be upset when people say, well, you eat a bunch of garbage on the weekend? It was over 20 years ago, and it was for such a small amount of time that skip loading has been in existence that is what people latched onto. And I know I didn't say that. It's been said by other people. So there is not only misinformation, but it's being passed on. And much like anything else, every time the information is passed on, it gets a little something that's different, whether a little something added onto it, that by the time it gets to the end of the road, it's not even what it was when it started out its journey. So that's why I'm here to clarify this. And there's still a lot more information out there. Yeah, I have the Skip Load Manifesto on Elite FTS. If you Google skip load, that's the first thing that will come up on, the search engine will be the Skip Load Manifesto. Problem is, people don't like to read as much anymore. They want to watch videos. They want that information to kind of want to say spoon fed. Maybe that's not the right answer, but it's easier to drive and, maybe be at work and be like, I'm going to listen to this, audio podcast, or I'm going to listen to see what Skip has to say versus trying to read something. So I get that. Times change, even though dinosaurs like myself are kind of like, oh, I wish it was all the same as it always was. Get off my lawn, that type of thing. So the diet itself is also misunderstood during the week. So you're on look, the best way to explain the diet during the week, I'm not going to go on for an hour about how to diet during the week. You basically diet during the week like you would for any other cut phase. It is not keto. Does not need to be ridiculously low carbs, because your level of depletion is not dependent on zero carbs. There are a lot of people that I work with, especially competitors, who will eat 300, 400, 500 grams of carbs a day and will still be depleted at the end of the week and need to load. It happens a lot. Depletion is not just about the carb intake. It's about the caloric expenditure. How do you train? Are you high intensity? Are you high volume? Is your frequency? Are you training 6 days a week? Are you training 4 days a week? Are you doing DC training or something that is high intensity, but it's relatively low volume, and you're only training DC training 3 times a week? Big difference. What's your job? Are you an ER nurse who is constantly on the go and you have chaos with your life, 12-hour shifts at a time? Or are you like Skip, who gets paid an inordinate amount of money to be able to sit here and go, oh, you know what? I'm just going to sit in front of my computer and talk. Or I'm going to type to my clients from midnight until 6 a.m. every night for the last 20 years and get paid more money than I deserve. I don't move much. I go to the gym. I go to the grocery store. I should consider the grocery store and the post office cardio, because I also don't even do cardio unless I am deep into a cut. So my caloric intake and my ability to get depleted might be different than the nurse, the ER nurse who's working 12-hour shifts. A lot of this has to come into play. Here's an example to make my point as well. If I do a 30-minute cardio session 5 times a week, that's going to have way more of an impact on me metabolically and as far as depletion than it will to the person who's working 12-hour shifts in the ER. Okay, that's the difference metabolically. And people get confused sometimes with when we talk metabolically or metabolism. Metabolism is basically everything, all the processes that go on in your body. It's not just how much you burn body fat. It's all the processes from recovery to it's just everything. So everybody has those different rates of metabolic activity, and movement will absolutely contribute to that as well. So your week-to-week diet really isn't anything like, if you worked with me, you wouldn't be like, wow, this is radically different than I would have done during the week. It's not. It won't be much different. My adjustments might be, because I've always said, and top coaches will tell you this, it's not, the magic isn't the plan that you get initially. The magic, or what you're paying for, is the ability to make those adjustments based on experience, wisdom, and working with so many people that are not just average. I have not just hundreds or thousands of clients that I've worked with, but I have hundreds upon hundreds of different scenarios that have been individual to each person. So there's a lot in here for someone who has been training someone for over 20 or training clients for over 20 years versus that coach who may be very good at what he does, but he's only been working with clients for 3 or 4 years, and he kind of cherry picks who he's working with. I work with challenged, and I'm known in the industry, with challenged metabolisms and people who have worked with other prep coaches and it hasn't gone very well. I relish that type of a situation with a client. It's very easy, really. If you're going to cherry pick your clients and there are no odd variables and they're just your average, I mean, it's like taking Phil Heath and getting him into condition. Sorry, I'm not dogging on Phil, but Phil or Hani for that matter. But Phil isn't going to go flat. I'm going to go flat. You're going to go flat. The vast majority of competitors who are listening to this will go flat. Phil's not going to go flat. He got food poisoning the one year. Nobody really knew. He got a little flat. No one was going to pick that out. No one noticed had he not said anything. So it's easier. And I've worked with these high-level guys. I've had many, many pros in every division. They don't respond like the rest of us do. Okay? It's not as much of a challenge. They still have to work their asses off. They still have to do everything right for the most part. But most of us can't drive to McDonald's 3 times a week and get our pro card. So there is that too. The diet during the week is not going to look radically different than anything anybody else would do. The skip loading is, I don't want to say the magic, but there is a lot of nuance in it. And I'm going to give you just some brief recommendations on how to know when to skip load and when not to, because it's too in depth and I can't explain every decision that would be made and say, well, if X and Y happen, do this. If Y and Z happen, do that. It's not, that's just way too complicated for this discussion. And quite frankly, I'm going to be honest again and say, I know the vast majority of you, especially if you're competitors, vast majority of you, you're trainers and you have clients. I'd rather help people, if I'm being honest, that are competitors and are trainers, because I'm giving information free after I've busted my ass for over 2 decades for that information to be taken to your clients and you monetize it. I'm not terribly cool with that. So you can take the method, but you better know what you're doing or your clients aren't going to get the results. And you can't blame it on skip loading, because I've already proved it works with too many people over 2.5 decades. So it'll be on you. If it doesn't work, you need to label it something else, not skip loading, because that wouldn't be fair either. So here are a couple things to consider when you're skip loading. Number one, that is arguably the most important, is you need to know what a baseline is. Okay. And my clients all know this, what your baseline is, part of the check-in template that I use. Baseline basically means that it's your lowest weight of the previous week before you skip load again. Let's say you're skip loading on Sundays. It's usually a 7-day cycle. And I have tried different cycles. I have tried every imaginable combination, even down to skip loading every 3 days, but smaller, things like that. 7 days it's just a good cycle. And that's what I settled on. It's easy to remember. It's incredibly effective, and it just works. So you don't have to be at your lowest weight prior to starting skip load. If you skip load on Sunday, that means you don't have to be at your lowest weight on Sunday morning. Let's say you hit your lowest weight on a Friday morning, that previous Friday. It's still your baseline. So let's say you're at 200 pounds, you diet for a week, and your lowest weight for that week is 198. You skip load for a meal on Sunday. That means that your baseline weight for the following week is 198. That means it's your lowest weight from the previous week. And after you skip load, we're looking to see how many days it takes you to get back to that baseline weight. It could be 2 or 3 days. It could be 6 days. And here's the thing to remember with this is it's not any better or depending on how many days it takes you to get to baseline. Some people will say, well, I don't baseline until like almost Saturday morning, and then I skip load on Sundays. Are you sure that's enough? It doesn't matter. I've done preps where I have baselined on Tuesdays and Wednesdays consistently, and I have done preps where I have baseline on Saturday mornings consistently, and there has been no difference in the two as far as the end result. What's important is, or more important is, how low you get that following week below the baseline. So you start out at 200 pounds, you diet for a week, your lowest weight is 198, you skip load on Sunday, your baseline for the following week is 198. You get back to your baseline, let's say on Wednesday, you're 198. Thursday, you come down 0.5 pounds. Friday, you come down 0.5 pounds. Now you're down to 197. Let's say you stay there. You're at 197. That's your lowest weight for that week. You lost a pound that week. That's productive. What does it look like? What's the visual? Because remember, scale weight, that's really only one tool in our tool bag or in our arsenal. It should never be thrown out. I don't like when trainers say scale weight doesn't matter. It absolutely matters, but it's not the last word. So it needs to be used in context. It needs to be used as another tool. Aside from scale weight, you also have visual. When push comes to shove, if you're competitive, really the only thing that matters is the visual. The only time that weight really matters is if you do have to make a weight, like you have a weight cutoff, then the weight becomes a little bit more important. But ultimately, we want to focus on the visual because a lot of people are going to recomp, especially if you're a good coach. If you're a good coach, recomp absolutely 100% happens. And thankfully, these days, people are acknowledging that. You go back 10, 12, 15 years ago, that was one of the biggest arguments on the board. You can't recomp. You can't stay at the same weight, get leaner. Hell yeah, you can. If you know what you're doing, it absolutely works. So the reason the recomp needs to be taken into consideration is, let's just say you stay at 200 and you don't get below baseline, but visually you're leaner. You're going to skip load. We're going to see if the same thing happens the next week. Next week, maybe the coach doesn't see anything visually that he sees. You're still at 200, but you say, man, I came down a notch on my lifting belt. Man, this is like my waist is getting small. I'm not going to see that in a picture, especially if you just started. Like you're in the first, 4 or 5 weeks of your prep. A coach will pretend they see something like that, but they don't see that. We'll see that as you get leaner and get deeper into the cut phase when the changes become more obvious. But those first 4, 5, 6 weeks, it's hard to see visual changes like the waist getting smaller, especially if your body fat level is higher going in. So that would still be progress as well. Another thing that can be used that I think is underrated is tape measurements. I think it's always good to do, tape your arms, tape your back chest, tape your waist, tape your quads, because if your quads and your arms and your back chest are staying relatively the same size, but your waist is getting, like, I don't know, in a month and a half or so, your waist is 2.5 inches or 3 inches smaller, but the other measurements are the same. There's no denying. You don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that you're going to be leaner. And if you're at that same weight, that client needs to know that, because there is this battle. As much as we don't want to admit it, those black and white measures, especially when it comes to scale weight, we still battle with those psychologically. Sometimes I do myself personally, and I have to remind myself, that doesn't matter. When you expect to see the scale move and it doesn't, then you think to yourself, okay, I think I look tighter, but like you're almost kind of trying, am I trying to convince myself, or am I not sure? When you add another way to measure progress, like the tape measure, scale weight, visual, all these things, you can even use DEXA. I have clients who use DEXA, and I think it is a great way to measure, especially lean body mass and body fat levels. And even more important, if you think that your client is recomping. I have seen some wicked recomps with some of my clients in the last few years. I have one in particular over the last 6-8 months that we've just been battling. He's an old head. He's a great friend of mine for a long time. Used to be a supermod on Intense Muscle. The recomp was just insane. It is important when you do DEXAs. This is important. I don't want to forget this. Make sure that you use the same place each time and use the same machine, because they are calibrated and they can be different. So make sure you use the same place and the same machine. That will guarantee that your measures are, that your reads are accurate. Those are just some recommendations there to use instead of just, the scale weight. But remember, that baseline is vitally important, because for most people, even if you're recomping for a little while into a cut, you're not typically going to recomp for the entire cut phase. It'd be nice if we did, and there are ways to do it. If you just started your cycle and you haven't been on cycle for a while, you took some time off from training, you come back. There are exceptions to the rule, don't get me wrong. The only other thing that I want to add to skip load meals is when to add another meal. That's something that I cannot give you black and white either. If you feel like they're stuck, then again, we fall back on the fact of this trial and error thing. If you feel like you're stuck, you have two options. You either typically need to reduce the calories during the week, or you may have to pull back on the skip load if you feel the skip load's getting in the way. And here's how you know if the skip load's getting in the way. Most of the time, if you do the skip load meal and you don't baseline, and there aren't other variables in play, like you just started your cycle, you just started training again, that sort of thing, then you need to look at, and you need to go, okay, maybe the skip load is too big. If you are baselining, let's say you baseline on Tuesday, Wednesday, maybe even Thursday, but you just stay at that weight and you don't drop anymore, that's arguably not the skip load. The vast majority of the time, that's not going to be a skip load issue because you baseline. Then it becomes, in a situation like that, the calories during the week are typically then too low. Too high. On occasion, they can be too low. That's why when you start your diets, you do want to start your cut diets with higher calories and go down versus starting too low, because you want to make sure that your metabolism is staged from the start. That's a whole other topic to go into that I'm not going to go into right now because I'm trying to stay focused on the skip load, but it is something that I will discuss in the future. I do a lot, because a lot of people will start a cut phase with the calories too low, and that can limit the metabolism. Remember, I was talking about the ceiling versus the basement. If you start with those calories too low on your regular diet, you're already not at the ceiling. I'd rather start them higher and see the weight go up and then go, oh, okay, yeah, let's pull it down a little bit. Start high, come down. Because sometimes you can start higher and you can go, oh, okay, they're losing 2-3 pounds right out of the gate. Okay, I might still have to take them up a little bit. Remember, as many calories as you can get in and still continue to get lean. That keeps the ceiling high. Skip load foods. I'm going to run over the skip load foods, my recommendations as far as health and everything else, and then I'm going to close this out. Remember, garbage will work, but I don't recommend it. I don't feel that it's optimal. That's the main reason for me putting this information out right now because I feel that that's a big, big part of the misinformation. So the recommendations that I give are this, and there are myriad of other foods that can be used, but these are the things that I recommend that people tend to have more access to. They tend to like or enjoy, and most of my clients fall within these types of meals. Gnocchi or spaghetti. Add a protein to it. Add some sauce to it. Don't be shy. You know what? If you can get a piece of garlic bread in there with it, cool. Again, this is homemade stuff. I'm not a restaurant guy. Don't trust restaurants. Okay. If you ever have chicken breasts at a restaurant and it tastes really good, you can bet your ass that there's something in it. Even though they cook it sous vide, which is great, makes great, they still have to add something. They want you to come back and eat their food. They want you to come back again and eat it because that's the best chicken I ever had. Trust me, there's something in it that is not supposed to be in it. I love fried chicken, but I don't like regular chicken. So clearly, I despise regular chicken. I choke it down. I've choked it down for years. I hate it because it's just dry white meat. So if it tastes too good, don't go there. They're putting extra stuff in it. Try to cook these foods at home. I understand social occasions. Maybe you're not getting ready for a show. Maybe you want to go out to dinner with your spouse or whatever, your friends. I get it. Every now and then, that's cool. But you want this to be optimal. I want it to be optimal for me. I assume that my clients want the same thing. So understand this. If you're going to go out to restaurants and you're going to eat that food and you can progress, okay, cool. But if you don't point the finger at me and don't point the finger at Skiploading, because I'm telling you right now, matter-of-factly, that it's not optimal eating at restaurants. Are there exceptions? Here are the exceptions. You can always, these days, find healthy alternatives. I can think of a couple kind of like franchise places. Sweet Green is awesome. They are farm to table. It's kind of like a Subway setup in the sense that you get in the line, you tell them whether you want quinoa, rice, greens, like kale and stuff. And they have everything from chickpeas to vegetables to blackened chicken and all this stuff. And it's farm to table. It's pretty good stuff. I have one just down the street, which is always nice. Even though it's just down the street, I still Uber Eats it on occasion. Sushi is easy, but know the difference between, just because I say sushi, that doesn't mean I'm just going to get 5 rolls of tempura. That's just fat people food. And that's just overdoing the fat when it doesn't need. Take advantage of the added carbs as much as possible. So poke bowls. I have my video on my Team Skip YouTube channel. Check it out. I make my poke bowls literally I love them. I think I've gone already. I mean, I'm in the off season. I'm getting ready for prep. I have not loaded on anything except my homemade poke bowls since I got back from Vegas the end of November. So they're really that good. And it's high quality stuff. I get my stuff from Wild Roots and it's cheap. I used to spend almost $200 for poke bowls at a couple of the local places here. Yeah, I had them delivered, but that's not the point. It's still expensive. And I can get this high quality, meat and fish and everything from Wild Roots. They even deliver it frozen, and I can make all my poke bowls here and save a bunch of money. And I know exactly what's going in my mouth and in my body. What else? On occasion, you have a Chipotle burrito. You know what? We're all going to, every now and then, it can get you by. It's not something I say to rely on, but something like that'll get you through. There are other, Pura Vida is a good example. Pura Vida you might not have because I think that's a South Florida thing. They do like quinoa, salmon, or ahi, vegetable, rice burritos in like whole wheat wraps and stuff. They're like $25 for a wrap. It's kind of silly, but it is good stuff and it's very healthy. So you may not have a Pura Vida. You may not have a Sweet Green, even though Sweet Green is certainly across, they're kind of spread out. There's a lot of those. But there's going to be something similar to that in your area. So look for something, if you can find something farm to table, that's great. Find something organic. I'm an organic guy these days. I don't want to die anytime soon. I want to take as, I want to take care of my body as best I can so that I can, last as I can. So I absolutely want other people to do the same thing. Pay attention to what you're putting in your mouth because it's, going to keep it, it'll tend to keep you around longer. So there will be those other options. Find those options. Do your due diligence. Call them, pester them, ask them, about their food or check it online, that sort of thing. What else can be in there? If you cook a burger at home, that's the best. I mean, I tell people, look, if you're going to go to Five Guys, all you got to do is check the menu there. Five Guys and their fries, like if you get a double burger, it's like, I don't know, 70% fat. It's like way up there. That is the type of food that peaking for a show is always great because the amount of sodium and everything else, that kind of last minute surge. But I'm not talking about peaking for a show. I'm talking about skip loading as a dieting method. And for longevity, getting the impact to be most optimal for your dieting and your progress of getting leaner and being as healthy as you can. So those are some examples. There's some recommendations. I'm sure there's more. When I get done, I'll remember that. But I want to wrap this up this way, okay? Because I'm coming up on an hour, and I said I would not go over an hour with this. If you have questions, if you have comments, I will be active in the comment section to the point where if there are questions around specific things where I think I can add an addendum to this video, I'll do that. I want the information to be as thorough as I can. I will tell you this, it's not a sales pitch. I'm just being honest. If you want to do it right and take the guesswork out of it, call me or call on one of my trainers, around the globe. I'd be happy to discuss working with you. Do you have to work with me to do it right? You don't. But you're probably going to have to do a little bit more due diligence on your end to make sure that the decisions that you're making, the way that you have things set up, you got to be good with trial and error, and you got to be honest with yourself when you assess yourself at the end of the week. That's the biggest reason that it's difficult to not work with a coach. You have to remove your emotions, arguably your hunger and everything else to some degree, and you have to make those decisions in an unbiased fashion so that you don't just justify, oh yeah, I earned, that it's not about earning. It's whether skip loading that week and how much skip loading is going to benefit you or not benefit you. It's not an earn thing. We all work hard. Some of us work harder than others, and some people will progress and they don't work very hard. That's just the way things go. That's bodybuilding is no different than any other endeavor in life where it's just sometimes not always fair. So I'm going to wrap it up, and I'm going to say this because this is exactly how I feel. You don't need to skip load. I don't care if you skip load. I'd almost say I couldn't care less. I'm not making this video to sell you on my method. I did that 20 years ago, and I'm done with that. This is the method. There's really no way to question it. It's been proven time and time again, and it continues to be proven when done correctly. So take it or leave it. It is what it is. If you don't prefer to diet that way, don't. If you don't like it for whatever reason, don't do it. If you can't have the discipline to eat one meal that is like off of your diet, off of your normal, regular chicken and rice diet during the week, then don't do it. Just do me the favor to not say that it doesn't work simply because you don't like it. It works, and to say it doesn't work, in my opinion, is unfair.
Loading to skip. Loading to skip.